Hi, my name is John Reznikoff. I'm the president of University Archives. We buy and sell documents, manuscripts, rare books, things related to famous people or famous events in history. In this case, I want to talk about something that's very personal to me, and it's kind of the story of my dad and his World War II career and the papers that he left behind that I never saw until he died. My dad was a first-generation American. He was born in the Bronx in 1925 during the Depression. His family was poor. He would tell me stories about how on Thanksgiving they couldn't afford a turkey, so his mother gave him 50 cents to go buy a bunch of turkey sandwiches for the family, and that really touched me. And his mother, my grandmother, was really close to me when I was a little kid. His father came from Russia and emigrated to this country in 1905 when the pogroms were occurring and there was tremendous violence against Jews. When my father arrived in the Bronx, he quickly made friends because he was always a very, very friendly guy, kind of like me. And his best friend was a man named Stanley Bardak. And through these pictures and letters, there's a story to tell. And now I'm going to tell it. Particularly of interest is this one that shows my father in the white uniform as a little kid with the family that he loved so much. Here is a picture as little kids of my father, maybe 4 or 5 years old, wearing the white with his best friend, Stan Bardak. Here's a picture when my father and Stan are about 10 or 12. This is a picture of Bob's wedding, Bob Bardak's wedding, and Stan is the somewhat shorter man standing in the front, and my father, the tall man with his hat off. This is a picture of my father in uniform with one of his other dear friends, Jimmy Greenstone, and we're still in touch with the Greenstone family. So Stan Bardak was in the European theater, and my father was in the Pacific. And this is a picture, a lot of people say it looks like a teenage me, of my father sitting on his barrack stoop. When I was 8 years old was the first time I asked my dad about the war. I was always interested in history and I wanted to hear about his role. And he was hesitant, but I remember we lived in West Hartford and he went on top of some shelf somewhere and pulled out his uniform and his rifle and he laid them out on the ping pong table. And I'd have to say I've never been the same since. I've always just revered what happened in World War II and that generation and the freedom that it gave us. And I always knew my dad was a badass. I just didn't know how much until after he died. Anyway, this is a photo that I had never seen. And he always showed me pictures of him smiling or with his arms around his buddies. My dad was a photographer and he built this darkroom in Saipan on the hill. Wires go to generator for electricity. Wooden walls lined with black paper for light proofing. And that's his writing on the back of the card. I found a bunch of the letters that Stanley had written my father when he was in the Army before him. These were all folded and hadn't been unfolded for the 70 years before. And in this archive, there's letter after letter of Stanley telling my father that he shouldn't come over, that war is 1,000 times worse than he thinks it is. My dad was an engineering student, first at the Bronx High School of Science and then later in college, and he had a deferral and he did not have to go to war because they wanted people like him to build bombs and help with the science aspect of war. But he would walk around in the Bronx and he felt guilty. He'd see mothers come up to him with a look on their face, or so he thought, like, how come my son is in war and you're not? And my father enlisted against the wishes of his parents and his buddy Stan. And these letters went on, And many of the letters were sent by what's called VE mail. And essentially they're photographs of letters. I started to look through the photos that he had not shown me, and a different picture of war emerged. One of death, one of destruction, one of the absolute horrors of war. Some of these which he took himself. It started to occur to me why my father did not like to talk about war. And then, like a shot through the heart, I saw one of my father's letters that he wrote to Stan. And I'll read it. Dear Stan, received your letter of August 15th. Nothing new to write since I wrote you last week. More and more men are leaving the island for the States, but I still have no idea when I'll leave. No soldier, except those in the status, could really celebrate VG Day. So we will have to make up for some lost time when we get back. We were pretty lucky in this war. But as you wrote, a good many were not so fortunate. They will probably leave us with lifelong memories and be a constant reminder of this damned war. Sealing my first letter in a long time today, as censorship regulations have just been lifted. What a strange feeling. We'll sign off for the prison. Marv. Now, my father was also head at age 19. He was the head of the prison, I came to learn, on the island, and he also led a flame-throwing brigade into the caves where many of the Japanese were hiding. And being somebody who handles documents and archives for my whole life, I asked myself, why would my father's letter that he sent off be in this stack of letters that he received? And I learned Stan was dead, and the envelope says, deceased. And then in the stack, another one followed, returned to sender. In the papers that I was sent by Bob Bardak, we see Stan's grave. And then we see the letter from the Secretary of War about his death. My father saved all his patches, and most of them are still on his uniform, which I've kept and coveted all these years. So it's taken me 2 years to tell this story. I had to have some distance from it. And I didn't understand for the life of me why my father wouldn't show me, somebody who's in the business and who handles letters and documents all the time, this treasure trove of history that he had. And he only selectively showed me happy photos. And I came to a realization. My dad was an engineer when he was a young man, and he soon became a psychologist. And he spent the next 50+ years of his life helping people and mentoring doctoral dissertations for over 80 students, and being the person that people would come to whenever they had any problem to help them. So I guess he figured that if the Army liked engineers, he didn't want to have anything to do with engineering. And he had seen so much death and destruction, including losing his best friend, that he spent the rest of his life in this pursuit of helping people. And he rejected war. So this whole thing is kind of a story of two men that were friends, and one of them survived and one of them did not. And it's a very personal story. And I want to end by showing a picture of my dad and mom, and I'm sitting on his lap, and my brother and sister are in the foreground, and my mom is gone too. So it's a really personal story about the things that are left behind, and I hope you appreciate it. Thanks.